What's up guys, my name is Marc Steiner and I hope you enjoyed that little video. I shot that completely on ProRes and that's what we're talking about today, the ProRes update in iOS 15.1. Now I know a couple people have already put out videos about the ProRes because they were using third-party apps that somehow got a hold of Apple's Golden Master version of ProRes. And I was going to wait until the official version launched. You never know what's going to happen. Apple could put some magic in at the last second. And so I waited for the official release on the iPhone 13 Pro Max. And I tested it out with that video. And I have to say, I'm really disappointed. I'm genuinely disappointed with ProRes. Like, I was shooting and everything looked great, everything looked fine, and I also took some comparison shots both in the H.264 as well as in the ProRes just to compare them, and I was looking back at what my laptop had, and I really couldn't tell a difference between ProRes and H.264, H.265. And not only that, these H.264, H.265 files were maybe like 10 to 50 megabytes in size, which is great, but 10 seconds of ProRes is a gigabyte. So I was shooting 15 seconds, maybe 20 seconds, and these file sizes were like a gig to 2 gigabytes depending on how many seconds I shot. Not minutes, seconds. That means that for 1 minute, you're getting 6 gigabytes. That means for 10 minutes, you're getting 60 gigabytes. Now, as a professional photographer and videographer, I'm not too worried about space. 60 gigabytes for 10 minutes. I shoot pretty high quality stuff on my current camera that you're viewing me through, the Sony a7S III, and those file sizes are massive because you're shooting like 400 megabytes a second. So of course, file sizes are massive. I'm no stranger to large file sizes. But the biggest issue for me when it comes to ProRes, it's not the file size, it's not the fact that H.264 is almost identical, it's the workflow process. So let's take for example, when I'm offloading footage from my Sony a7S III, my file sizes are usually between 70 and 150 gigabytes depending on what I'm shooting. So I take the CF Express card out of my camera, I put it onto the card reader, and I'm either offloading it to my laptop or an external SSD. And that, depending on the file size, between 70 and 150 gigabytes, usually moves between a minute and 3 minutes. That's pretty fast, right? Like 150 gigabytes in less than 3 minutes is great. And that works great for me. I can just kind of open my NLE, get ready on the timeline, maybe grab a drink, and 150 gigabytes is there. No need to worry about it. And then I can import it into the timeline. But with Apple ProRes on the iPhone 13 Pro Max, AirDrop isn't really an option because these file sizes are so big. I attempted to use AirDrop and I tested it with one file at the very beginning, and a 1.1 gigabyte file took just over 3 minutes. And I'm like, okay, if I have 50 gigabytes and each gigabyte is going to take 3 minutes to transfer, I'm looking at over 2 hours of transfer time. And I'm like, that's not reasonable. I'm not going to do that. Plus, the disconnection with AirDrop, if anything happens, all the files cancel out. That's not a good workflow. I can't have that happening. So after realizing that AirDrop wasn't an option, I was like, okay, we're going to go wired. So I busted out the USB-C to Lightning adapter. I can't believe that Apple is still using Lightning, but it is what it is. The issue with the Lightning cable is that it's USB 2 speed. And what that means is you're not getting fast speed. So to offload that 50 gigabytes of files took just around 30 minutes. And I'm sitting here like, okay, I can transfer 150 gigabytes in about 3 minutes off of my professional camera, or I could transfer 50 gigabytes in about 10 times as long from my iPhone. So already, from a workflow perspective, I'm not really excited about Apple ProRes because it's just not a viable option. However, I was willing to forgive all of that if the footage looked absolutely insane. And it didn't. It looked absolutely fine. Let's hop onto the laptop and I can show you what I'm talking about. So our first comparison shot is up, and honestly, I can't tell a difference between the two. Maybe the sky is a little bit lighter with a slightly different blue on the ProRes version, but I honestly thought that the ProRes would have much nicer highlight roll-off and maybe better dynamic range, but what we're seeing here is that they are nearly identical. And I'm kind of shocked by that. So now we're zoomed into 200%, and I'm still not seeing a difference between these two shots here. And they both look really, really good, and that's a good thing. Now, when we zoom into 400%, this is where you're gonna start to see a difference. If we start looking at this file, you can see that the ProRes is a little bit sharper of an image, it's less soft, but I think that's because the H.264 file is having that noise reduction done in camera, and the ProRes is just the straight file, no noise reduction. So you're gonna do noise reduction yourself, and it keeps that noise/grain pattern in there so you can fine tune it when you're editing in your NLE with your own amount of noise reduction. And I think, you know, if you're shooting ProRes, you wanna have as much flexibility as possible, especially when it comes to noise reduction. But honestly, who's watching iPhone videos at 400%? No one's gonna be able to tell that difference right there. And I think most professionals aren't shooting ProRes on their iPhone. They're using a professional camera to do that. Let's move on to the next example. All right, so I wanted to try a more real world scenario with a pretty big dynamic range difference. At the pier where the people are walking is pretty much in shadow, and the highlights in the sky are, you know, it's sunset, so it's really, really bright. And again, I thought I might see a nicer highlight roll off here, and you can kind of see that, but I wonder if that's due to auto exposure or because of an actual nicer highlight roll off with ProRes. So I'm gonna kind of give that one the benefit of the doubt and say it was a highlight exposure difference and that the highlight roll off is not actually significantly better on ProRes. I will say that the ProRes looks just a little bit cleaner, but if we zoom in, you can see that the noise reduction on the H.264 file, yes, it's a little softer, but honestly, it looks pretty good, and I'm not mad about that at all. And if we're looking at the sky as well as the other lights in this shot, the H.264 is looking pretty good. Yeah, the ProRes looks a little softer, looks a little nicer, but not a significant difference. All right, let's move on to the next shot. This is really interesting because I shot this and it was pretty dark out there. These images don't reflect what my eye was seeing, so the camera on the phone is actually doing a better job than what my human eye could see because it was significantly darker than what you're seeing on these images. So dynamic range is looking great on both of these. I will say the ProRes, again, might have a slightly nicer highlight roll-off here in the sky, but if we're comparing images straight up, I'm not seeing a huge difference. The noise, when we zoom in on 200%, is a far more evident on this one because it is a lower light situation. And at 200% on a 16-inch laptop, I actually prefer the H.264 file because it looks like there's less noise. Sure, it's a little softer, but it's looking pretty clean. Now, onto the final comparison between H.264 and ProRes. This shot was really, really interesting for me because this was after sunset. So the dynamic range that this phone is pulling off is insane because this is not at all what it looked like in real life. So straight off the bat, I do think ProRes looks a little bit better in this particular shot. The H.264 is having a ton of noise reduction placed upon it, and it does look a little bit softer. But colors and everything look identical. I'm not saying that ProRes looks exceedingly better, but it does look a little bit sharper with more detail. And you can see that significantly when we punch into 200%. There is a sharper image coming off of ProRes, and that's because there's no noise reduction happening on this one. So even though there is significantly more noise, it's less mushy. And I think for some people, that might look a little bit better. But in general, they look pretty good. I think ProRes might be better in lower light situations if you want full control. And this is where it really comes into play when we punch into 400%, just so you can see that noise pattern and everything that's going on. I actually don't know how this is going to translate on YouTube, but hopefully you can see the difference. So at 400%, yes, the ProRes is significantly sharper with a lot more detail. The noise is a lot more evident, but the H.264 noise reduction is looking real mushy. And I think that in that circumstance, ProRes is the play. But again, you're looking at like 10 times the difference when it comes to file size, and you have to decide whether or not that's worth it for you. And I think for most people who are not offloading this footage for the specific purpose of editing in an NLE, it's not worth shooting ProRes in most situations, especially in well-lit circumstances. I don't think ProRes is worth the headache of the file size as well as the transfer and workflow processes. So is ProRes great? Sure. If you really absolutely need that ProRes codec for your workflow, yeah, it might be worth it for you. But otherwise, H.264 and H.265 look amazing coming out of the iPhone, and there's really no image quality difference that's coming out of this. So these sensors and these lenses that Apple has on the brand new iPhones and their post-processing and AI, that's doing the majority of the work here. So at the end of the day, ProRes is just a different codec. It's not going to completely change your image. You're not getting drastically different color. There's no real advantage to ProRes unless you're working in Final Cut with like a big project and it's optimized for that ProRes workflow. Otherwise, I really just love shooting with the H.264 and H.265 files because they're so much easier to work with. They're smaller file size. You're not worried about filling up your iPhone. I had a warning come up on my iPhone, I think this is for everyone, that it shows you how many minutes you have left to record in ProRes. And I was doing the math and I'm like, oh my God, if I shot all 40 minutes of this, I'd have like my entire phone filled up, 40 minutes of video footage, and there goes half a terabyte. Like, that's crazy to think about. So yeah, definitely not a viable option for long shooting. And I shot an entire portrait video using the H.264 file codec, and it looks great. The images were great, the color was great, everything looked great about the H.264 files. And now shooting with ProRes, I wasn't seeing a huge difference at all. So at the end of the day, it's up to you, but I'm not seeing a huge difference between these file codecs. But I want to know what you guys think. Could you tell a noticeable difference between the clips? Do you think ProRes is worth it? Let me know in the comment section down below. My name is Marc Steiner, and I'll see you next time.